Harper Audio presents How to Lose a Duke in 10 Days, An American Heiress in London, by Laura Lee Guhrke, performed by Susan Ericksen. Prologue. Kenya, East Africa. The chanting woke him, a primitive, repetitive melody that brought him slowly to consciousness. As he awakened, his first sensation was pain, and he tried to draw back, to return to oblivion, but it was too late for that. The chanting was the reason. It went on, and the more he tried to ignore it, the more deeply it seemed to grind into his brain. He wanted to cover his ears and obtain some blessed silence so he could sleep, but he could not seem to lift his hands. How strange. His head was aching fit to split. His skin prickled as if he were being pierced by thousands of white-hot needles, yet inside his body there was a deep, bruising cold, as if his skeleton were made of icicles. And his leg. Something was wrong with his leg. The pain he felt seemed centered there, in his right thigh, and radiated outward to every other part of his body. He wanted to open his eyes and look, see what was wrong with his leg, but once again he could not seem to make his muscles obey his will. His mind felt dazed, unfocused. What was wrong with him? He strove to think, but thinking seemed to take far too much effort. And when the chant quieted to a low murmur, he began sinking back into sleep. Visions and sounds danced across his mind, so quick that he wasn't sure if they were a dream or an explanation. A tawny blur, searing pain, and the sharp report of rifle shots echoing across the Nyong hills. The picture in his mind shifted, and he saw a girl in a blue silk frock. A tall, slim girl with a freckled face, Titian hair, and green eyes. She was looking at him, but there was no flirtation in her glance, no come-hither smile on her pale pink lips. She stood so still, she might have been a statue, and yet she seemed the most alive, intense creature he'd ever seen. He caught his breath. She couldn't possibly be here, not in the wilds of Kenya. She was in England. Her image faded, receding into a mist, and though he tried to bring her back, he couldn't, for his brain felt thick, his wits like tar. Something cold and wet touched his face, a compress that brushed across his forehead, then over his mouth and nose. He shook his head from side to side in violent protest. He hated having anything over his face. It always made him feel as if he were smothering. Jones knew that. What was the fellow doing? The wet cloth brushed against his face again, and he managed to shove it away. His body was shaking. He could feel it, involuntary shudders deep inside. He was so cold. That perplexed him. This was Africa. He was never cold here. England, now, England was cold, with its constant dampness and drizzle, its standoffishness and class-conscious snobbery, its frozen traditions. Even as those disparaging thoughts went through his mind, another rose up right behind them. It's time to go home. He tried at once to dismiss the notion. He still had work to do here in Africa. He was in Africa, wasn't he? That pang of uncertainty impelled him to open his eyes and lift his head. The moment he did, everything spun violently, and he thought he might be sick. He squeezed his eyes shut until the nausea passed, and when he opened them again, he saw things that were blessedly familiar. A canvas roof and walls, his battered ebony trunk desk, piles of skins, his rolled map shoved...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?